The notice came down from the ranch board on a Wednesday in early November, tacked between a wanted poster and a feed schedule, and she read it twice before she folded it into the pocket of her coat. Capable woman needed. Cook and keep books for working cattle operation. Wyoming Territory. Widow or single. References considered but not required. Inquire Dalton Station General Delivery. She did not take it down from the board. She left it there and walked back to the laundry where she had been working since September and stood at the tub with her hands in water that had gone cold and thought about what it meant that she was considering it at all. She had been in Casper 8 months, long enough to know the laundry would not keep her through another winter, not the way the owner was running it, taking on credit and paying late and looking at the floor when she asked about the week's wages. Long enough to know that the 2 other women boarding in Mrs. Fallow's house had more claim to the town than she did, had people here, had history here, and she had neither. She had come west with her husband 2 years ago, and he had lasted one, a fever in June, a burial in July, and by August she had sold what little they had managed to acquire and was doing other people's washing in a town she had not chosen and did not love. She went back for the notice that evening. It was still there. She wrote the letter that night and posted it the following morning before she could decide against it. She said she could cook, keep a ledger, manage stores, and work hard. She did not say she was 29, or that she had been a schoolteacher in Ohio before she married, or that she had a particular way of watching a situation before she stepped into it that some people found useful and others found unsettling. She said she was available by the 1st of December. The reply came in 10 days. Come on the 4th. Stage to Dalton Station. Someone will meet you. No name. The handwriting was compressed, the letters leaning slightly left, like a man writing in a hurry who had decided not to slow down. Someone did not meet her. She stepped off the stage at Dalton Station at 2:30 in the afternoon, into a cold that had weight to it, the kind that comes off the high plains in November and means what it says. The station was a low building with a covered porch and a single bench and a stovepipe putting out thin gray smoke. 3 other passengers got off with her and moved away quickly, toward people waiting, toward horses, toward the interior of the station where there was presumably a stove. She stayed on the porch. She had her trunk, her traveling bag, and a satchel with the things she might need before the trunk could be opened. She waited 30 minutes by the clock she could see through the window. Then she went inside and asked the man behind the counter if he knew the cattle operation north of town. The one looking for a cook and bookkeeper. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at her trunk. Then he said the Kellerman place was 12 miles out on the North Road, and that the man who ran it had been in 3 days ago for fence wire, and had not looked like a man in any position to be turning down help. She asked if there was a way to get out there. There was a freight driver who went north twice a week. He had already gone that morning. There was a livery that could put her on a horse if she could ride, and had money for it. She could ride. She paid for the horse and told the boy at the livery she would bring it back the following day or arrange for its return. He looked at her trunk. She looked at her trunk. They loaded it between them into a small wagon that the livery owner agreed to rent for another $1.50, and she drove out of Dalton Station at 3:15 with 12 miles of open country ahead of her. And the sun already getting low. The land was nothing like Ohio and nothing like Casper either. It was high and flat and enormous, the grass beaten down by the season to a pale gray gold, the sky above it a deep cold blue that went on until it stopped at the mountains. The road ran straight north and then bent slightly west around a long ridge. She kept the horse at a steady pace and watched the country unfold. She was reading it the way she had learned to read things that mattered, slowly looking for what it was doing instead of what it looked like. The ranch came into view from the top of a low rise, a main house, long and low, built of logs with a shake roof, a barn that was larger than the house and in better repair, 2 outbuildings, one with a chimney, a corral holding maybe 15 head of cattle, and a separate smaller pen with horses, 3 of them. The fences were in reasonable order except the far eastern section, where she could see from the road that 2 posts had gone down and no one had got to them yet. She drove through the gate and into the yard. A dog appeared from behind the barn, assessed her without alarm, and then lost interest and went back where it had come from. No one came out. She set the brake on the wagon and waited a moment. The late light was flat and cold across the yard. Smoke from the chimney of the main house. The cattle moved in the corral in the slow collective ways weighty. Cattle do when nothing is wrong, but nothing is particularly right either. She climbed down, looped the reins over the post by the porch steps, and knocked. No answer. She tried the barn. He was there, working in the half-dark on something mechanical, part of a harness or a piece of equipment she couldn't immediately identify, his back to the door. He was perhaps 40 or slightly past it, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had been large once and had stayed that way without trying. His hair was dark, going gray at the temples, and he had not shaved in several days. He heard her and turned. He looked at her, then at the yard behind her, then at her again. She said she was the woman who had answered the notice. She had come on the stage. He said the stage came in the morning. She said there were 2 stages, the morning one and the afternoon one. She had come on the afternoon one. He looked at the yard again, as if the afternoon might have changed it somehow. Then he put down what he was holding. He said he had meant to be there. She said she gathered. He did not apologize, and she did not wait for it. He helped bring her trunk in without being asked, which she noted. The inside of the house told her several things at once. The main room was large enough, a table with 4 chairs, a cook stove on the north wall, a stone fireplace on the west wall with a fire going in it, 2 windows, no curtains on either, a shelf above the fireplace with a ledger, 2 empty cans, a length of rope, and a coffee cup that had been sitting there long enough to leave a ring. The kitchen area had the stove, a workbench, a pantry with its door standing open. She looked at the pantry from where she stood. It was not bare. It had been stocked in a practical but indiscriminate way, the way a man stocks a pantry when he is buying things so he does not have to think about food, rather than because he has a plan for it. He showed her the room off the back of the house. It was small. A cot, a window, a nail in the wall, a washstand with a basin. The window looked out at the back fence and beyond it the open pasture, and beyond that the mountains. She said it would do. He said the crew ate at 6 in the morning and 6 at night. He said there were 4 men besides himself during the week, 2 on weekends. She asked if there was a regular supply run. He said Thursday to Dalton Station. She asked if she could see the ledger in the morning. He looked at her for a moment, not suspicious exactly, but careful. She said she could not keep books without seeing what was in them. He said that was fair and went to get his coat because the cattle needed checking. She spent the hour before supper taking stock of the kitchen. The situation was not desperate. It was the kind of situation that looked worse than it was because no one had been attending to it. The flour was adequate, the salt pork plentiful, the coffee more than enough. There was a sack of dried beans that had not been touched, and 2 cans of tomatoes and a jar of something preserved that she could not immediately identify. The cook stove was in better condition than the one in the last place she had worked, a boarding house in Rawlins the winter before Casper. But the flue needed cleaning. She could smell it. She made a note. She found potatoes in a bin outside the kitchen door, more than she expected, and onions hanging from the ceiling of the lean-to beside it. She had supper on by the time she heard boots on the porch. The crew came in without ceremony. 4 men, as promised. The youngest was perhaps 17, and looked at her with open surprise that he covered quickly. The oldest was a compact gray-haired man named Stiles, who nodded to her and sat without comment. The other 2 she did not catch the names of that first evening and did not ask again. She would learn them in time, and that was soon enough. He came in last. He washed at the basin by the door, dried his hands, and sat at the head of the table. She served from the stove. No one said anything about the food being different. The youngest man ate 3 helpings. That told her something about what they had been eating before. After the crew went out, she washed the dishes. He stayed at the table with the coffee she had poured and did not drink quickly. She was aware of him watching her work without appearing to watch. She said nothing. She was still taking inventory of the kitchen, of the house, of the situation. There was more to learn before any of it was worth commenting on. He said the last woman who had cooked for the crew had left in September. She said she understood. He said it was not a situation he had managed well. She said she could see that. She said it without judgment, just the plain reading of what was in front of her, and he heard it that way. He pushed back from the table. He said he would leave the ledger on the shelf in the morning. She said that would be fine. She sat up after he had gone and made her own notes by the lamp. What she had seen in the pantry, what she had seen in the barn, the 2 fence posts down on the east line, the flue, the state of the crew's equipment, as best she could tell from the brief time they were inside. She was not building a case. She was simply doing what she had always done, which was learn a thing properly before she tried to work with it. She was up at 4:30. The stove lit easily and the coffee was made before there was any sound from the rest of the house. She had biscuits in the oven by 5 and the salt pork cut and in the pan by 5:30. She found eggs in a crate on the porch. Someone had been keeping chickens, though she had not seen a coop, and used a dozen of them. He came in at 5:45 and stopped in the doorway. Not surprised, something that was not surprise. He poured himself coffee from the pot she had set on the iron and sat at the table and opened the ledger he had brought down with him. She said she would look at that after breakfast if he did not mind. He said he did not mind. He said it the way a man says something he has not entirely decided yet. The crew came in. They ate, the young one. She had learned by then his name was Tech, the youngest hand. Tried to say something complimentary about the biscuits and stopped himself halfway through when he wasn't sure of the etiquette and then said it anyway. She thanked him. The gray-haired man named Styles refilled his own coffee without asking, which she took as a positive sign. After they went out, she sat at the table with the ledger and read it straight through. It took most of an hour. The accounts were not complicated, but they had not been maintained with any regularity. There were purchases from Dalton Station going back 18 months, some entered, some apparently forgotten. There was a balance owed at the general store there, not ruinous but not comfortable. There was a note on the back page in different handwriting, smaller and more careful, that listed the cattle inventory from the previous spring. 43 head, 12 calves. She thought about the 15 she had counted in the corral. He came back in for water mid-morning and found her still at the table. She asked him about the cattle numbers. He stood at the basin with the cup in his hand and was quiet for a moment. He said they had lost some to a hard September. She asked how many. He said 8. She looked at the ledger page. She did not say what she was thinking because she was not finished thinking it yet. She asked if he had a buyer lined up for the spring. He said he had an arrangement with a buyer out of Cheyenne, the same one he had used the previous 2 years. She asked if the arrangement was written. He said it was a handshake. She closed the ledger. She said she would need to go into Dalton Station to return the livery horse anyway. She asked if Thursday was still his regular supply day. He said it was. She said she would go with him on Thursday and take a look at what the store was carrying. He looked at her a moment. She said she was not trying to take over anything. She said she was trying to understand what she had to work with. He said he understood. He said it plainly, not defensively, and went back out. That afternoon she found the chicken coop. It was behind the smaller outbuilding, partly hidden by a woodpile, a structure that had been added on to twice and never quite reconciled with itself. 12 hens, 3 of which looked underweight. The straw was old. The water basin had been knocked over and not righted. She righted it, filled it from the bucket hanging on the fence, and stood in the small space, looking at the birds settle back around her. She asked Tech that evening when he came in early to fetch something from the barn if he knew who had been tending the chickens. He said nobody in particular. He said they kind of tended themselves. She said she could see that. The next morning she mucked the coop before breakfast. She found a bag of scratch grain in the lean-to and mixed it with some dried corn she had found in the pantry and added a handful of wood ash from the fireplace because the birds needed grit and calcium and she did not have oyster shell but ash would do for now. She checked each bird carefully. 2 of them had lice. She made another note. He came out of the barn and saw her coming back from the coop with the empty bucket. He stopped. She kept walking. She said the birds needed attention, and she had given them some, and she would need sulfur dust if he had it, or she could get it Thursday. He said he might have some in the tack room. She said that would save a trip. He said he would look. He found it and left it on the kitchen step without saying anything. She used it that evening. She worked in the failing light, with the birds complaining around her, and by the time she had finished, the flock was no longer entirely happy with her, but the problem was addressed. She washed her hands thoroughly at the pump and went in and started supper. He was at the table when she came in, not with the ledger but with a piece of paper and a pencil, writing something. He looked up when she came in and then down again. She started the stove and did not look at what he was writing. It was not her business yet what he did at his own table. After supper, after the crew had gone, she brought the small account book she kept herself out of her satchel and sat at the other end of the table from him. He had put the paper away but had not gone out. She opened her book and began entering what she had spent and what she had used from the stores and what she would need Thursday. He watched her for a moment without appearing to watch. He asked if she had always kept her own books. She said she had. She said she had found it easier to know what she had than to wonder about it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the name of the store in Dalton Station was Whitmore's, and that the owner, a man named Sutter, was not unreasonable, but kept close track of what was owed. She said she had gathered that from the ledger. He said she had read it carefully. She said she had read it once. Once had been enough. He did not say anything else. After a while, he got up and went to check the horses, the way he apparently did every evening before dark. She stayed at the table. Outside, the wind was coming down off the mountains in long, heavy pulls, and she could hear it finding the gaps in the window frames and around the door. She pressed a folded rag into the worst of them, the one at the bottom of the kitchen door, and the sound changed to something quieter. Winter came in earnest by the second week. First snow fell on a Sunday, light at first and then serious, and by Monday morning it was 8 inches in the yard and still coming. She had expected this. She had been watching the sky since Thursday and had added to the supply run accordingly. More flour, more dried beans, 2 extra slabs of salt pork, a sack of oats. Sutter at Whitmore's had raised his eyebrows at the total, but had extended the account without comment when she put down his name. He had said, coming back out to the wagon with the last of the supplies, that she had bought more than usual. She had said winter usually required it. He had looked at the loaded wagon and said nothing more. That week, she made herself useful in every way she could find. She repaired the draft collar on the door between the main room and the back hallway, which had been leaking cold air in a thin, steady stream that no one had noticed because they had been living with it too long. She organized the pantry, not to change what was there, but to be able to find it quickly when the light was bad or the time was short. She mended the younger hand Tech's coat sleeve, which had been held together with a piece of wire through 2 eyelets, in a solution that was either extremely practical or a fire hazard. She was not sure which. She repaired the oven door on the cook stove, whose lower hinge had worked loose. She did not make a list of these things or present them for notice. She did them and moved on. He noticed anyway. Not all at once. One morning, he reached for the coat peg and found it at the right height instead of pulling loose from the wall, the way it apparently had been for some time. Another evening, the flue in the fireplace drew properly for the first time since she could remember, which was only since November, but she had been told it had been a problem longer. He said nothing about these things. She said nothing about them. The understanding between them grew in the way that understanding grows when 2 practical people are working in the same space and paying attention. The crew noticed the food, not loudly, but in the particular way men notice things they have been doing without. The way Stiles reached for a second helping without checking the pot first. The way Tech said thank you at the end of meals with a frequency that suggested he was aware of something he had not been aware of before. She went into Dalton Station twice more in December, once with him and once alone on the Thursday wagon that Stiles drove when he went for feed. On the second trip alone, she stopped at Whitmore's and spoke to Sutter directly about the account balance. She had been thinking about the handshake agreement with the Cheyenne buyer and about the 15 head in the corral and about the calculation she had done quietly at the table one evening when the house was still. She asked Sutter what cattle were running per head at the Dalton feedlot and what the Cheyenne buyers typically offered against that. Sutter looked at her for a moment in the way the store woman in the chicken story had looked at her predecessor, with the slow recalibration of a person reassigning their estimates, he told her. She thanked him and bought the cornmeal and the nails she had come for and drove back. That evening after supper, she sat at the table with the ledger open and her own account book beside it, and waited until the crew had gone. He came in from the last check on the horses and hung his coat and washed at the basin. He looked at the table. She said she had some thoughts on the spring sale, if he wanted to hear them. He dried his hands and sat across from her. She did not tell him what to do. She told him what she had found. The Cheyenne price against the feedlot price, the weight the cattle would put on between now and spring if they were fed properly through the cold, the rough math of what that meant. She said the handshake arrangement might still be the right choice, but it was worth knowing what the alternatives were. She turned the ledger so it faced him and pointed to the column she had added in pencil on the inside back cover. He looked at it for a long time. He said he had not thought about it that way. She said she had not been sure he would have the numbers to think about it. She said it matter-of-factly, not as a rebuke, and he heard it that way. He sat back. He looked at the window where the dark was full and the frost was making its way across the lower panes. He said the buyer out of Cheyenne had been doing business with his father before him. She said she understood that. He said there was something to a man you could rely on. She said there was. She said relying on someone and getting a fair price were not always the same thing. He was quiet for a while after that. She put the kettle on because the evening had gone cold. He said, without looking up from the ledger, that his wife had kept the books for the first 4 years they were running cattle. He said it the way a person says a thing they have said before, worn smooth with use, nothing catching on it going out. She did not ask what had happened. She poured the tea when the kettle came to heat and set a cup in front of him and sat back down. He said she had a head for it. She said she had been taught to. She said her father had been a grain merchant and had kept very precise books and had insisted she learn them before he would let her help with anything else. He looked at her. She had said more in that moment than she had said in the 3 weeks prior, and they both recognized it. She picked up her cup. Outside the wind ran along the eave line, a long, slow sound, steady. The lamp was low. He did not go out to check the horses again that night. January was hard. A storm came in from the north in the second week and stayed 3 days, and the drifts came up past the lower fence rails. She cooked everything hot and kept the stove going through the night and brought soup out to the men in the barn because they were sleeping with the horses to keep them from panicking in the wind. On the second day of the storm, when the visibility was low enough that the barn was invisible from the house, he strung a line from the back door to the barn door so no one would lose their direction. She had seen her father do the same thing once, a bad winter in Ohio when she was 12. She said so, standing in the kitchen door watching him drive the stake. He said his mother had told him about it. She said it was a good thing to know. He said it was. On the third day, the storm broke and the sky went clear, and the light off the snow was almost too much to look at. She had baked bread that morning, the good kind with the heavy crust. And when the men came in from digging out the drifts around the barn and the corral, she put it on the table with the last of the preserved butter she had been rationing since December. Stiles looked at the bread and then at her and said it was the best winter he had worked. He said it simply, the way the gray-haired man said most things, and went back to his plate. She did not say anything, but she noted it the way she noted everything and put it somewhere she would remember. In February, the cattle lost another head to the cold despite everything, and she watched him come in that evening with the kind of tiredness that is not physical, and she did not ask about it. She put supper on. She let the room be quiet. After the crew had gone, she poured the last of the coffee and set it in front of him and sat across from him with her mending basket and worked through a shirt of Tex that had gone at the elbow and said nothing at all. After a while, he said they were going to be all right. She said she thought so too. He looked at her across the table. There was the lamp and the mending and the coffee going cold and the particular stillness of a house in deep winter. Everything contracted to this room, this light, these two people. He said he owed her more than he had been paying her. She said they could talk about that in spring. He said he meant to. She looked back at the mending. The elbow patch was not complicated work. She had it finished in another 10 minutes and set it on the pile with the others and folded her hands over the basket and looked at the window where the frost covered everything. He stayed at the table a long time. She stayed too. The fire dropped in the stove. Neither of them moved to add to it. The cold came in at the edges in the patient way it did that time of year, and they sat in it without minding. March brought the thaw in pieces. First, the south-facing slope of the ridge, then the yard, then finally the creek, which broke up on a Thursday morning while she was standing at the kitchen window with her coffee, and she watched it happen in real time. The ice going in long plates, turning and knocking together, moving slowly out of sight. She had a garden plan on a piece of paper that she had been refining since January. The kitchen garden from the previous year, she had been told, had not been replanted after his wife. She had been watching the ground as it came clear. The east side of the house caught the morning light and was sheltered from the north wind by the house itself, and the soil there looked rich, darker than the surrounding yard, and she had pulled up a handful of it in late February when a warm day had softened the first 2 inches. She showed him the plan one evening in March. He studied it. He said the fence around the old kitchen garden plot was still standing. She said she had seen that. He said the soil there had been good once. She said she thought it still was with some attention. He turned the paper over in his hands. He said he could get the bed turned before the ground hardened again. She said she could do it. He said he knew she could. He said he wanted to. He turned the beds the following Saturday. She worked beside him, putting in the early crops, onion sets, peas, the cold-tolerant things that could go in while the nights were still freezing. They did not talk much while they worked. The ground was dark and clean-smelling, and the sky above them was the pale bright blue of early spring, and the mountains had snow still on them, but it was the good kind of snow, the kind that feeds the creek and the grass and eventually everything else. By April, the kitchen garden was in. The chicken flock had recovered. The hens were laying again, properly, enough to put eggs on the table every morning and some aside. She had found 3 new hens at the Friday market in Dalton Station and bargained the seller down to a price that left her with enough left over for a paper of needles and a length of blue cloth that she had not let herself want until she had the money for it. He saw the cloth on the kitchen chair when he came in that evening. He did not say anything. She made the curtains for the kitchen windows that week, nothing elaborate. The plain, flat kind that let in the light but gave the room a boundary it had not had before. She hung them on a Tuesday morning, and by the time he came in for supper, they had been there all day, and the room looked different in a way that was hard to name immediately, but that he noticed. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He said the room looked right. She said she thought so. He sat down. She served supper. The window behind him held the last of the evening light, the curtains moving slightly in the draft from the door, the pale blue fabric going to gold at the edges where the sun caught it. He poured his coffee. He held the cup in both hands. He did not drink it right away. He said there was something he had been wanting to say. She waited. He said she had come in November with her trunk and her account book and her way of seeing things, and he had not known what to do with any of it at first. He said he was a man who knew cattle and land and weather, and not much else. He said there were things on this ranch that had not worked right in a long time, and he had been living with them until she showed him it was possible not to. He said it carefully, without any ornament, the way he said the things he meant. She looked at him across the table. She said she had come expecting a job and found something she had not known to expect. She said she did not have a word for what it was. She said that was all right. He set the cup down. He got up and came around the table, not quickly, without any uncertainty in it. He stopped on her side of the table, where she was still sitting. She looked up at him. He put his hand out and she took it, both of hers around his one, and held it the way you hold something you have decided to stop being careful about. He said her name was what he meant to say. He stopped. He said that was not right either. He said there were not words for it in his experience, and he was not a man with a large supply of words to begin with. She said she understood him. He said he thought she did. He said that was still new to him. She stood. Outside, the last light was going off the mountains, and the yard was filling with the blue quiet of early spring evening, and the chickens had gone in, and the horses were still in the corral, and everything on the ranch was where it was supposed to be. She put her hand flat against his chest and felt the steady, particular weight of his heartbeat, slow and even, the way his voice was. And the way he moved, and the way he had looked at that ledger back in December when she had shown him something he had not seen before. He put his arm around her. She let him. Spring went on. The kitchen garden came up straight and unhurried. The cattle put on weight. The hay came in well, and they put it up over 2 weekends with the crew and some borrowed help from the neighboring place, a family named Wick, whose eldest son worked alongside Tech without complaint, and whose wife came out on the second day with a pie that she left on the kitchen step. She left a note with it. She said she had heard the Kellerman place was doing well again. She said it was good to hear. He found her reading the note when he came in for water. She handed it to him. He read it. He set it on the table. He said people had been watching to see what would happen here. She said she knew. He said she had made the difference. She said they had made the difference. He looked at her in that way he had developed in the months since March, the way of looking at something you have stopped being afraid of losing, which is the truest kind of looking there is. She had come to know it by then, had learned its weight and what it meant, and she looked back at him the same way. Outside, the summer grass was coming in green and thick along the fence lines, and the creek ran full and clear, and the mountains above it held their snow high and clean against the sky. The ranch did not look like the same place it had been in November. It was not the same place. The fences were sound. The garden was in. The ledger balanced for the first time in 2 years. The curtains in the kitchen window moved in the warm afternoon air, and the hens moved in the yard, and somewhere behind the barn, the dog was sleeping in the sun the way it did when everything was as it should be. She stood at the kitchen window with her coffee and looked at all of it. She looked at it the way she looked at everything she intended to keep.